The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which was already suspicious. My father had never sent me a handwritten letter in 34 years of life. Birthday cards came from my stepmother, signed with both their names in her careful cursive. Holiday checks arrived in printed greeting cards with a sticky note that said love, Dad in handwriting so rushed it barely looked intentional. But this was a proper envelope, thick cream-colored stationery with a wax seal pressed into the back flap, the kind of envelope that announced itself before you even opened it. I stood at my mailbox for a long moment, Lily balanced on my hip, her small fingers already reaching for the gold seal like it was treasure. "No, baby," I said softly, shifting her to my other hip. "Let Mommy open it." She protested with a sound that wasn't quite a word yet. She was 14 months old and had decided that everything in the world belonged to her, and I smiled in spite of myself. That smile, the one that had kept me sane through 14 months of single motherhood, through sleepless nights and formula shortages, and the particular loneliness of watching your married friends post family photos while you learned to fold a stroller with one hand. I peeled back the seal carefully and pulled out the card inside. The paper was heavier than anything I owned. Cream with gold embossing. At the top, in formal serif font, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 60th birthday of Richard Elaine Beaumont." Then, beneath the details, the venue, the date, the time, a handwritten note in my stepmother Diane's unmistakable script. "Vivienne, black tie only. Please dress appropriately. We are expecting a distinguished guest list, and would appreciate it if you could come alone. Don't embarrass us." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because I genuinely could not believe what I was reading. "Come alone." Lily grabbed for the envelope again, and I let her have it, watching her gnaw on the corner with total contentment, completely unbothered by the fact that her grandfather's birthday invitation had just told her mother to leave her at home like an inconvenient piece of luggage. The party was in 3 weeks. My father's 60th. A milestone I had been waiting to be invited to for the better part of a year, ever since I'd overheard my stepmother tell someone at church that they were planning something spectacular. I had waited for my invitation the way I had learned, over many years, to wait for things from my father's household, with low expectations and a practiced indifference that didn't quite reach my heart. And now it had come. "Don't embarrass us." I went inside and put Lily in her playpen and sat down at my kitchen table, and thought about what kind of woman I was going to be about this. Here is what you need to understand about my relationship with my father. It was built on a foundation of conditions. Not love. I don't think he was incapable of love, exactly, but conditions. Richard Beaumont loved the version of me that performed correctly. The Vivienne who made honor roll, and wore the right clothes and dated the right kind of men, and went into the right kind of career. He had loved me very much during my 2 years at the law firm, when I could be described at dinner parties as my daughter, the corporate attorney. He had loved me considerably less when I left the firm to start my own business, a bespoke event planning company that catered to high-end clientele, because event planning sounded frivolous to a man who measured worth in billable hours. And then I had gotten pregnant. Not married, not engaged, just pregnant, by a man named Daniel who had decided at 7 months that fatherhood wasn't something he could commit to, which was a sentence I was still not entirely sure I believed was real. Daniel had left. I had stayed. And my father had gone very, very quiet in a way that communicated everything without saying anything at all. We had not spoken directly in nearly a year. "Don't embarrass us." I picked up my phone and called my best friend, Renata. She answered on the first ring, which meant she was either at her desk procrastinating or she already somehow knew something had happened, because Renata had an uncanny radar for drama in my life. "He invited me to the party," I said. Finally. A pause. "What's the catch?" "Diane's note says to come alone. Black tie. Don't embarrass us." A longer pause. "She told you to come alone?" "In writing. With a wax seal." "Vivienne." Renata's voice had shifted into the register she used when she was choosing her words very carefully. "What are you going to do?" And that was the question, wasn't it? Because here's the thing about being told not to embarrass someone. It implies that you have the power to embarrass them. It implies that something about you, your existence, your choices, your daughter, is a source of potential shame. And I had spent a long time, too long, letting that implication go unchallenged. I looked across the apartment to where Lily sat in her playpen, happily demolishing the envelope. She had a piece of the wax seal stuck to her chin, and she looked absolutely delighted about it. "I'm going to go," I said. "To the party?" "Yes." Another pause. "Alone?" I didn't answer right away. because the answer that was forming in my mind was complicated, and I needed to think it through before I said it out loud. There was something I hadn't told Renata yet. Something I hadn't told anyone, because it had happened so fast and so quietly that I was still processing it myself. 3 weeks ago I had met someone. Not met, not the way you meet a man at a bar and hand him your number. I had met him through work. A client referral for a corporate event I was planning, a charity gala that required someone with very specific expertise in security and logistics. His name was James Okafor, and he was, without question, the most quietly formidable person I had ever encountered in a professional context. He was organized and calm and funny in a dry, understated way that snuck up on you. He was also extraordinarily patient with Lily on the one occasion she had been present at a planning meeting, which was when I had started paying attention to him in a different way. We had been on exactly 2 dinners. I refused to call them dates until I understood what they were, and I had not told anyone because I wasn't ready for the commentary. But James had mentioned, casually, in the way he mentioned most things that were actually not casual at all, that he would be happy to accompany me to the party if I needed support. I had not answered him yet. "I'm still figuring out the details," I told Renata. She made a sound that meant she did not believe me, but was going to let it go for now. "Just promise me you won't let them make you small. You always get small around your dad." I said I promised. I wasn't sure I meant it. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat with the invitation again. I read the handwritten note one more time. "Black tie only. Don't embarrass us." And then I did something I had been thinking about since the moment I'd opened the envelope. I opened my messages and typed a response to James. "I'd like you to come to the party with me," I wrote. "There are some things I should explain about my family first." His response came back in under 2 minutes. "I'd like that. And Vivienne, bring Lily." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I thought, my father had not seen his granddaughter once. Not once in 14 months. He had sent a card when she was born, Diane's handwriting again, signed by both of them, but he had not come to the hospital, had not visited the apartment, had not asked to meet her. And something in me had been waiting, patiently and with dwindling patience, for him to ask. He had not asked. So perhaps it was time to stop waiting for permission. I started drafting my RSVP. What I wrote in that RSVP was going to change everything that happened 3 weeks later. And if I had known in that moment exactly what I was setting in motion, the expression on my father's face, the silence that would fall over 200 guests, the moment that would rearrange everything I thought I understood about who my father actually was, I might have hesitated. But I didn't know. So I sent it. The morning of the party, I woke up at 5:30 and could not go back to sleep. Lily was still breathing quietly in her crib. She had become, blessedly, a reliable sleeper in the past 3 months, and the apartment was that particular pre-dawn blue that made everything feel both fragile and important. I lay in bed for 20 minutes running through logistics the way I always did when I was anxious, because logistics were something I could control. Car service booked, confirmed. Lily's dress, ivory silk with smocking at the chest, the most beautiful thing I had ever bought for her, pressed and hanging on the back of the nursery door. My own dress, still in the garment bag from the boutique, which I had not let myself open more than once because I was afraid of losing my nerve. The dress was not subtle. Let me explain. When Diane wrote black tie only, she meant a certain kind of black tie. She meant the language of old money and deliberate restraint, dark suits on men, floor-length gowns in navy or champagne, or the particular shade of burgundy that said I went to the right schools. She meant nothing that called attention to itself, nothing that said look at me when the correct posture was I belong here quietly. I had, after 3 days of thinking about it, bought a dress that said something different. It was emerald green. Floor length, yes, technically compliant with the black tie requirement, but with a neckline that was doing a great deal of work and a back that was doing considerably more. It was the kind of dress that a woman wore when she had decided, after years of making herself smaller, to take up the exact amount of space she was entitled to. My friend Camille, who had accompanied me to the boutique, had said simply, "This is a declaration." She wasn't wrong. I had bought it anyway. Now, at 5:30 in the morning, I wasn't sure. I got up and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet, and thought about Renata's words. "You always get small around your dad." I had been thinking about that for 3 weeks. I had been thinking about all the ways I had learned to make myself small in that house, in the shadow of Diane's impeccable standards and my father's very particular vision of who his daughter should be. I had been an excellent small person for a very long time. I had worn the right clothes and said the right things and laughed at the right moments and swallowed entire rooms full of words that needed to be said. And then Lily had happened. Not to me, for me. Lily had happened for me in the way that something so difficult and so beautiful could rearrange every priority you had ever organized your life around. Because when you are responsible for a small person who watches everything you do, you start to think very carefully about the lessons you are teaching her. And one of the lessons I was not willing to teach my daughter was the lesson that your worth is contingent on other people's comfort. That you should apologize for existing. That don't embarrass us was something you had to accept because the person saying it shared your blood. I poured my coffee and I thought about James. We had had dinner for the third time 4 days ago, and I had told him everything. Not carefully, not strategically, I had just told him because he was the kind of person who made you want to be unstrategic. I told him about my father and Diane, and the year of silence and the invitation and the note. I told him about Daniel, which was harder. I told him that I was tired of feeling like my life was a series of situations I needed to manage rather than a life I actually wanted to be living. He had listened to all of it, and then he had said something that had been sitting with me since. You've been performing for people who didn't earn the audience, he said. What would you do if you stopped? I had not had an answer in the moment, but I was starting to find one. Lily woke up at 7 in the cheerful, unambiguous way she always did, announcing the day with complete conviction. I fed her breakfast and played on the floor with her for an hour, and then I started getting us both ready. I did her hair first, 2 small puffs on either side of her head, the way she had started to prefer when she discovered she could pull out anything more complicated. And then I put her in the ivory dress and stood her up in the crib and took a photo because she looked like a painting. Okay, Lilybird, I said. Here's what's going to happen today. She looked at me with the solemn, bottomless attention she sometimes gave me, as though she understood the gravity of things. We're going to go see your grandfather. He hasn't met you yet. And that's his loss, not yours. You remember that. She reached up and grabbed my face with both hands. Yes, I said. Exactly. James arrived at 10:30, which was earlier than we had agreed, and I opened the door still in my robe because I had fallen behind on timeline while giving Lily a bath. He was already in his tuxedo, black, impeccably fitted, with a pocket square that matched nothing except his own quiet certainty, and he looked at my robe and the state of my hair and the general evidence of organized chaos in my apartment and did not miss a beat. What can I do, he said. That was the thing about James. He didn't perform helpfulness. He didn't make a show of rolling up his sleeves. He just looked at the situation and asked what needed doing, and then he did it without commentary. Within 15 minutes he had occupied Lily on the floor of the living room while I finished getting ready, and I could hear her laughing from the bathroom. Really laughing, the full-body kind that meant she had entirely approved of this person. And something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. I opened the garment bag. The emerald dress. I put it on. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. I looked like someone who had made a decision. I looked like someone who was not going to be small today. I looked like my mother, a little, my real mother, who had died when I was 9, and who had by all accounts been exactly the kind of woman who took up the space she was entitled to. I walked out into the living room. James looked up from the floor where he and Lily were dismantling a set of stacking rings. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I was still learning to read. You look extraordinary, he said. Lily held up a stacking ring in agreement. The car arrived at 11. We buckled Lily into the car seat I had arranged to have installed the day before, and I sat in the back with her while James sat in the front. And as we pulled away from my building and moved through the city toward the address on the invitation, I felt the familiar contraction of dread that my father's house had always produced in me. The way my shoulders crept up. The way my voice tended to flatten. All the old software booting up. I looked at Lily. She was watching the city through the window with absolute wonder, like she was seeing it for the first time every time. I reached over and held her small hand. She squeezed back without looking away from the window. The venue came into view and it was exactly what I had expected. A historic estate on the edge of the city, manicured gardens, valets in white gloves, the kind of place that had been designed to communicate that certain people operated on a different level than the rest of humanity. Cars were arriving in a steady stream. Women in dark gowns. Men in correct tuxedos. Everything calibrated and controlled. As our car joined the line, I looked out the window and recognized someone. A woman standing near the entrance talking to 2 men I didn't know. She was tall, elegant, the kind of woman who had always made me feel slightly too loud, even when I was being quiet. It was Diane. She hadn't seen us yet. And then James turned in the front seat and looked at me with those steady eyes. "Ready," he said. I thought about everything that was about to happen inside those doors. I thought about my father's face when he saw the dress. When he saw Lily. When he understood that I had not, in fact, come alone. "Ready," I said. But neither of us was prepared for what we were about to discover about my father's distinguished guest list. A discovery that would rewrite everything I thought I understood about why I had been sent that invitation in the first place. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The estate's grand foyer was everything the invitation had promised and several things it hadn't. 200 people filled the main reception hall. I had coordinated enough high-end events to estimate a crowd on site, and they were arranged in the kind of loose, performing casualness that wealthy people perfected over decades. Clusters near the bar, smaller conversations near the tall windows overlooking the garden, a string quartet in the corner playing something baroque and important. The flower arrangements were extraordinary, sculptural white orchids and branches of something architectural that I could not name, the kind of arrangement that signaled a very good florist with a very large budget. I took all of this in within approximately 4 seconds, because event planning had rewired my brain to read a room before I'd consciously decided to. Lily, for her part, was looking at the chandelier. It was an extraordinary chandelier, 10 feet across, cascading crystal, and she had tilted her head back in her car seat carrier on my chest and was staring at it with the total, transcendent focus she usually reserved for ceiling fans. In this context, it was almost unbearably charming. James stayed close beside me, not crowding, not performing, just there, and I was grateful for it in a way I didn't know how to express with anything except proximity. We had not yet been seen. We were in the doorway. I had exactly these few seconds before the world rearranged itself. I used them to look for my father. Richard Beaumont was not hard to find. He was 60 today and looked, in the way that certain men managed to look, like he had been intending to turn 60 for several years already. Silver hair. Good posture, the kind that came from conviction rather than effort. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit the way my father always wore clothes, like the clothes had been informed of their purpose and agreed to it. He was standing near the center of the room in a loose circle of men my age and older, laughing at something, and for one unguarded moment I saw him simply as a man at a party. Not my father, not the architect of conditions and careful silences, just a person who was turning 60 and was surrounded by people who wanted to be near him. Then he laughed again, and I noticed who he was laughing with. I stopped walking. James, sensing the pause, turned slightly toward me without drawing attention to the movement. The man standing beside my father, the one who had apparently just said something that made him laugh, was Ambassador Harold Okafor. I knew who he was because everyone in this city who paid any attention to international affairs knew who he was. Former Nigerian diplomat turned global philanthropist, one of the most recognized humanitarian voices in the world, a man who had been on the cover of 3 magazines in the past year alone. I knew his face from photographs. I knew his name from every major charity gala I had ever organized or attended. And I knew something else, standing in the doorway with my heart, doing something complicated in my chest. I knew his last name. I turned very slowly and looked at James. He was already looking at me. "James," I said. My voice was admirably steady, I thought, under the circumstances. "Yes," he said. "Is Ambassador Okafor your—" "My father," James said. Simply, without performance. I looked at the ambassador. I looked at James. I thought about 3 weeks of getting-to-know-you conversations, of dinners and logistics meetings, and one long Sunday afternoon walk where he had talked about his family only in the vaguest outlines. A large family, close, a father with strong opinions about most things. And I thought about how carefully, how deliberately, he had withheld the specific detail that was now rearranging my entire understanding of the last 3 weeks. "You knew," I said. "You knew our fathers knew each other." "I found out the same time you did," James said. "When you sent me the invitation with the host's name on it. I recognized it. And you didn't. I was going to tell you. I was trying to figure out the right way." He looked at me with that steady expression that I was realizing was not calm, but rather something more disciplined. A man who felt things deeply and had learned to be very deliberate about what he did with that. "Does it change anything? About today?" I looked at my father laughing with his father. I looked at Lily, who had moved on from the chandelier, and was now studying my necklace with scientific intent. I thought about all the things I had come here to do, all the private resolves I had made in my kitchen at 5:30 that morning. No, I said. It doesn't change anything. But it changed everything, and we both knew it. We walked in. The first person to see us was Diane. She had been moving through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had orchestrated this event and intended to manage it. She had always had the instincts of an event planner without the vocabulary for it, which was one of the reasons she had never entirely respected my career. She saw me first, and I watched the sequence of her recognition move across her face like a weather system. First the social smile, automatic, then the inventory of the dress, a fractional tightening around the eyes, then the carrier on my chest and the baby in it, and something that moved so fast I almost missed it. Not just surprise, but something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine alarm. "Vivienne," she said. "Diane." I kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful. The orchids are extraordinary. Is that maison verte?" She was caught slightly off balance by the specificity. "Yes, actually. Brilliant choice. Very architectural." I smiled the way I had learned to smile in rooms like this, with full warmth and no information. Then I stepped slightly aside and gestured. "This is James Okafor. And this." I reached up and touched Lily's back gently, and she turned her attention from my necklace to Diane. "Is Lily?" Diane looked at Lily. Lily looked at Diane with the serene, appraising expression she used on strangers until she had formed an opinion. Something crossed Diane's face that I couldn't read, and then she said, "Okafor," in a voice that was extremely careful. "The ambassador is my father," James said. Diane looked at him, then at me, then at the baby, then back at James with an expression that I would have needed several more seconds to fully decode. But we didn't get those seconds because across the room, my father had seen us. I knew the moment he did because I had always been able to feel my father's attention across a room. Some children who grew up with conditional love developed that sense. The early warning radar for a parent's notice, always waiting to know whether the temperature would be warm or cold. I felt it now. His gaze finding me, then moving to the woman beside him to say something, then returning to me and going very still. He started toward us. I had approximately 30 seconds. I used them to reach up and unbuckle Lily from the carrier, and I settled her on my hip. This child, this 14-month person who had my eyes and her absent father's stubbornness, and who had never once, not for a single day, been anything other than the most clarifying thing that had ever happened to me. She looked at the approaching figure of her grandfather with total equanimity. My father stopped 2 feet away from us. He was looking at the baby. Just looking. Not at me. Not at James. Just at Lily, who looked back at him with those eyes that were my eyes and tilted her head the way she did when she was deciding what to make of something. "Vivienne," my father said. His voice was complicated. "Dad," I said. "Happy birthday." "A moment. She looks like you," he said. Still looking at Lily. "When you were small, you had that same," he stopped. And that was when James's father arrived at the edge of the circle we had formed, and he looked at James and then at me and then at the baby on my hip, and he smiled in a way that transformed his face entirely. Not the diplomatic smile from the photographs, but something much simpler and warmer, and he said, "So this is her." Every person in the vicinity went still. "You know Vivienne?" my father said, and I could hear that he was recalibrating fast, trying to understand the geometry of this. "Not yet," the ambassador said. He looked at James. "But my son has told me a great deal about her." My father looked at James, then at me, then at his old friend. I watched him take in the tuxedo, the posture, the quiet authority, and I watched him understand something. Then he looked at Lily again, and something moved through his face that I had not seen there in a very long time. "Can I?" he stopped. Started again. "May you hold here?" I looked at my father. 60 years old, silver-haired, for the last 14 months absent from his granddaughter's life by a choice he had made and perhaps not fully thought through. I thought about all the things I had prepared to say today. All the righteous, earned architecture of my grievances. I looked at Lily. She was already reaching toward him. Children that age did not perform. They didn't have the equipment for it. Lily reached for my father because something in her, some animal, wordless, unjudging instinct, had registered family before I'd made a single decision about it. I handed her over. And what happened next, the specific thing my father did in the next 60 seconds, in front of 200 people, in a way that no one in that room would forget, was something none of us, not even James, had anticipated. He held her like he was afraid. That was the first thing I noticed, The way my father's arms arranged themselves with a care that was almost painful to watch, like he was terrified of getting it wrong. Like something in him knew the weight of what he was holding was not just 14 months, but everything that had accumulated in the silence between us. Lily, for her part, patted his cheek. It was such a straightforward, uninflected gesture. The matter-of-fact affection of a child who had decided someone was safe, and it hit my father like a physical thing. I watched it happen. I watched his face do something it very rarely did. He was not, as a rule, a man who showed his feelings in public. He had been raised in an era and a class that considered emotional display a kind of poor taste, and he had transmitted this training faithfully across 30 years of distance and careful reserve. I had grown up being fluent in the language of his restraint, learning to read the slight softening around his eyes that meant approval, the half-inch drop of his chin that meant disappointment, the particular quality of his silence that meant he was moved but would not say so. I had been reading that language all my life, and I was reading it now. He was undone. Not dramatically, not weeping, not visibly shaking. But something had gone out of the architecture of his control, and what was underneath it was so naked and so human that I had to look away for a moment, because it was almost too much. Diane had appeared at his shoulder. She was watching him hold Lily with an expression I could not fully parse, something complex moving behind her carefully maintained surface. "Richard," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. He was looking at Lily, who was now examining the white boutonniere on his lapel with great scientific seriousness. "She has your mother's hands," my father said. "My grandmother. His mother. She had died when I was 4, and I barely remembered her except as a warm smell and a low, particular laugh. That my father was thinking about her now, in this moment, holding this baby. Something about that cracked open a room inside me I hadn't known was there. "Dad," I said. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the chandelier. "I should have," he started. "You should have," I agreed quietly. Not hard. Not as an accusation. Just the plain truth, offered in the spirit of honesty rather than punishment. He nodded once slowly. The nod of a man who knew he had no defense and wasn't going to try to build one. Around us, the party had continued, but our immediate circle had gone very still. The ambassador was watching his old friend with something that looked like quiet satisfaction, like a man who had expected this and was glad to see it. James was standing close enough that I could feel his presence without looking. That particular quality of attention he had, the way he could be completely still and completely present at the same time. And then Diane spoke. "I want you to understand," she said, and her voice had changed. The performance register had gone, and what was underneath it was not warm exactly, but it was real. "When I wrote that note, the invitation note, I was scared," said the ambassador. We all looked at him. He said it simply, without apology, looking at Diane directly. "You were scared. That's what that kind of note is. Not cruelty. Fear." He glanced at me. "I am not excusing it. I'm naming it. There is a difference." Diane looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I was scared. I thought about that. About what exactly she had been scared of. I had spent 3 weeks interpreting that note as hostility, as the latest installment of a long tradition of Diane managing my access to my father's life, performing the role of gatekeeper to his affection. And perhaps it had been some of that. But scared. I turned that over. "Scared of what, exactly?" "You thought I would disrupt something," I said slowly. "Bring Lily and disrupt the image. The party, the guest list, I gestured slightly at the grandeur around us. "All of this." "You are very beautiful," Diane said, which was not what I had expected. "And you have always been very much your mother. And when you walk into a room," she stopped, looked at my father, who was not looking at her, who was looking at Lily. "People notice." There was something in that sentence that was going to require a much longer conversation to fully understand. But this was not the moment for that conversation, and I was not the kind of woman who forced conclusions before their time. "We need to talk," I said. "Not today. But we need to have some of these conversations that we've been not having." "Yes," Diane said. "We do." My father looked up from Lily. "James," he said, and his tone had shifted into something more deliberate, something that was reassessing. "Your father and I have been friends for 30 years. "I know," James said. "He speaks about his children as though they're the best thing he ever did." A pause. "He's right in your case, from what I can observe." "Dad," I said, because this was moving in a direction I was not entirely prepared for. "I'm allowed to have eyes," my father said, which was almost exactly what I had said to Lily this morning, and something about the parallel made a laugh come out of me that surprised us both. He looked at me when I laughed. And then, very carefully, he laughed too. It was the first time I had heard my father really laugh in a room with me in longer than I could easily calculate. Not the social laugh I had watched him aim at the ambassador earlier. This was different. This was the laugh from childhood, the rare laugh that meant something had genuinely gotten through his defenses. It was 3 seconds long, and it changed the atmosphere between us more fundamentally than anything that had been said. Lily looked back and forth between us with enormous satisfaction, like she had arranged this deliberately. Then the evening shifted. Not gradually, suddenly, the way a weather change can happen. Because across the room, I saw a cluster of people reacting to something near the main entrance, a particular quality of murmur and repositioning that I had learned, through years of event coordination, to read as, "Something unexpected has arrived." James saw it too. He was already looking toward the door when I followed his gaze. The man in the entrance was someone I had never seen before. He was younger than most of the guests, early 30s, blonde, wearing a tuxedo that fit him correctly, but with a slightly different quality of correctness than the other men in the room. Like he had purchased the appropriate costume, but was not entirely comfortable in it. He was scanning the room with an expression that was trying to be confident and not quite managing it. He was carrying flowers. Pink peonies, Lily's favorite, which was something that almost no one knew. I felt the floor shift under me. Because I had not told James about the flowers. I had not told anyone. The only person who had ever known that Lily would reach for pink peonies, who had been there months ago when we had discovered it, was Daniel. I had told you he left at 7 months. I told you he decided fatherhood wasn't something he could commit to. What I had not told you, what I had not had occasion to tell, was that I had received a letter 3 weeks ago, arriving just days after my father's invitation, from a man I had deliberately not thought about. The letter had said, in careful and self-aware language, that he had made a catastrophic mistake, that he wanted to meet his daughter, that he understood if I refused, that he would try anyway. I had not answered it. I had told no one about it. And now he was standing in my father's birthday party, and everyone who mattered was in this room, and Lily, who did not know any of this, was still in my father's arms across from me, and James was standing beside me, and the next 30 seconds were going to require me to be more than I had been required to be in a very long time. I had a choice to make, and I had to make it right now. I did not panic. This is the thing I am most proud of when I look back on those 30 seconds. I have a tendency, under extreme social pressure, toward a particular kind of performance calm that is actually just panic, wearing a nice dress. But this was different. I was standing in an emerald gown with 140 grams of statement behind it. My daughter was in her grandfather's arms for the first time. The man my father had spent 3 decades calling a friend had just quietly called my stepmother's worst instincts by their right name, and the person I least expected to see had just walked through the door. And I was calm. Actually genuinely calm. I think it was Lily, honestly. 14 months of being the only sure thing in someone's world teaches you something about what you can withstand. I looked at Daniel. He hadn't seen me yet. He was still at the edge of the room, working up to something, looking around with the expression of a man who had done something impulsive and was now conducting a rapid cost-benefit analysis. I had a few seconds before his gaze swept to my corner of the room. I turned to James. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly. "Right now. Before you see what I'm about to go handle." He looked at me. "The man at the door. With the peonies. A breath. That's Lily's father." Something moved through James's expression. Not the thing I might have feared, not withdrawal or a recalibration of exits. Something steadier than that. He looked at Daniel for a moment and then looked back at me with that discipline of his, the thing that kept feeling in a coherent place. "What do you need?" he said. "I need to talk to him. Alone. 5 minutes. Okay. And I need you to." I glanced at my father, who was now watching the door with the instinctive situational awareness of a man who ran things. He had not yet recognized Daniel because they had never met. "I need you to stay here." "I'm not going anywhere," James said. I believed him. That was perhaps the strangest part. How completely I believed him. I moved through the crowd toward the door. Daniel saw me when I was about 15 feet away, and the relief that crossed his face was so immediate and unguarded that I felt briefly something I had not expected to feel: pity. Not contempt, not the righteous and well-earned anger I had been stockpiling for months. Pity. For a man who had made the worst choice of his life, and was only now understanding the full dimensions of it. "Vivienne," he said. "You need to not be here," I said. My voice was low and absolutely steady. "This is my father's party, and I am not going to have this conversation in front of these people." I know, I shouldn't have, He looked around the room with an expression of someone who has just fully arrived somewhere and is realizing it was a mistake. "I found out about the party through a mutual friend, and I thought if I could just see her." "She doesn't know you," I said. "She's 14 months old and she's never met you, and you walking in here with flowers isn't going to change that in one evening." I paused. "You wrote me a letter. You didn't respond." "I'm still deciding." I looked at him directly. "But I want you to understand something. I am deciding. Not you. Not what you want, not your timeline. Mine. A breath. I have thought about what's right for Lily. I have thought about it every single day since she was born. And when I'm ready to tell you my answer, I'll tell you. But this," I gestured at the party, "this is not how that conversation happens." He looked at me for a long moment. "She looks like me," he said. Quietly. Not a challenge, a realization, the kind that comes from seeing a photograph of yourself you didn't know existed. "She does," I said. "Around the nose. The forehead. Is she?" His voice cracked slightly, which was the human thing that I had not been prepared for. "Is she okay? Is she good?" I thought about Lily this morning, staring at ceiling fans and confiscating envelopes, and reaching for a grandfather she'd never met with total, fearless certainty. "She's extraordinary," I said. He nodded. He was holding the peonies in a way that looked like he'd forgotten he had them. "I'm going to go," he said. "I'm sorry. For this," he gestured at the party. "And for the other thing. The bigger thing." "I know you are," I said. "That's not the same as fixed." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He left. No scene, no escalation, just a man making the first correct decision he had made in over a year, walking back out through the doors with his flowers. I stood there for a moment and let the 5 seconds of aftermath wash through me. Then I straightened, touched the necklace at my collarbone, a habit, a grounding, and turned back toward the room. My father was watching me from across the crowd. Lily was still on his hip. He had seen me handle that conversation, had watched me from a distance without knowing what was said, and in his expression was something I recognized with a jolt: respect. Not the conditional, performative kind he had trained me to compete for, genuine, reevaluating respect. The kind you earned. I walked back. James stepped to meet me halfway, not to intercept me but to match my pace. Just that, just walking beside me without ceremony. And it was one of the simplest and most consequential things anyone had done for me in a long time. "Handled," I said. "I know," he said. We rejoined my father. Lily, when she saw me coming, did the thing she did when I had been away too long. Reached for me with both arms and the specific sound of determined reunion. I took her from my father's arms and she grabbed my necklace and settled her cheek against my collarbone and looked out at the room from there with the satisfied survey of someone who had accomplished something. "She likes you," I told my father. "That means something. She's selective." He was looking at Lily and then at me, and there were 60 years of a life on his face, all of it rearranging. "I've missed a year," he said. "Yes. I can't get it back." "No. What can I?" He stopped. Tried again, which was itself already more than he usually managed. "What would you need from me?" "Two." He made a gesture that stood in for the rest of the sentence. I thought about Renata's voice. "You always get small around your dad." I thought about myself at 5:30 in the morning with my coffee, deciding what kind of woman I was going to be. I thought about the emerald dress and what it had been saying all evening, what it had always been saying. I am here. I take up space. I am not going to apologize for what I am. "I need you to show up," I said. "Not for events. Not when it's convenient or when it reflects well. I need you to show up for her when no one's watching and there's nothing in it for you. That's it. That's all I'm asking." He was quiet for a moment. "I can do that," he said. "I'll believe it when I see it," I said. "And that's not cruelty, that's just honesty." I think we both could stand to be a little more honest with each other. Something unexpected happened then. Diane put her hand on my arm. It was brief and it wasn't warm exactly, but it was there, a human acknowledgement, a small physical concession from a woman who had spent 11 years of my adulthood carefully maintaining her position as steward of my father's attention. She took her hand away quickly and turned to accept a glass from a passing server and said nothing, but it had happened. I noted it. The ambassador appeared at my father's side, and he was looking at James and at me, and at the baby on my hip with the particular expression of a man watching a plot develop the way he had hoped. "I told you," he said to my father, quite mildly. My father gave his old friend a look. "You could have given me more warning." "You had enough warning. You had a year." My father received this without argument. Then the ambassador turned to me, and his attention was direct and warm and entirely without pretense. "I hope you'll come to dinner sometime," he said. "At the house. The whole family together. I have been wanting to meet you for some time." I looked at James, who looked back at me with those steady eyes. "I'd like that," I said. The dinner wound on for another 3 hours and things were not resolved. That would take months, years, the patient and imperfect work of people trying to do better after a long time of not. My father held Lily twice more that evening. He was awkward about it in a way that I recognized as effort. He was not, by nature, a man who knew what to do with small children, and his attempts to engage her were effortful and slightly formal, and she endured them with the charitable patience of someone who understood that not everyone was good at beginnings. But he tried, and she let him. There was a moment near the end of the evening. The cake had been cut, the speeches had been made, the crowd had thinned to the kind of comfortable residue that remained at the end of good parties. When I found myself standing near the window with James, looking out at the lit garden, Lily asleep against my shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "When you said bring Lily, that first text, you already suspected your father would be here." He considered this. "I knew our fathers knew each other. I didn't know they were this close. I didn't know what would happen." A pause. "But I thought," he stopped. "What did you think?" "I thought that you had been treating yourself as a problem to be managed. As something that needed to be minimized before it was let into certain rooms." He looked at me directly. "I wanted to watch you realize that wasn't true." I looked at him for a long moment. "That's an enormous thing to do for someone you've been on 3 dinners with," I said. 3.5, he said. The Sunday walk was half a dinner. A small, careful smile. "And I'm not in the habit of doing things for people I'm not paying attention to." Lily made a small sound in her sleep, the sound she made when she was very deeply under. And I shifted her slightly, and James instinctively steadied my elbow with one hand, so quick and natural it was almost an instinct rather than a decision. I let the steadiness be there. Outside, the garden lights came on all at once, sudden and warm, and the last guests were moving through the lit paths toward the valet. And somewhere behind us my father was saying good night to his oldest friend, and something that had been closed in me for a long time was, tentatively, carefully, with appropriate skepticism about its own optimism, opening. I thought about the invitation. Black tie only. Don't embarrass us. I thought about what had actually happened. That I had arrived in an emerald dress with my daughter and a man I was beginning to know, and I had not embarrassed anyone. I had simply been fully, exactly, unapologetically myself. And the room had not collapsed. The relationships that needed to crack had cracked, and the ones that needed to hold had held, and Lily had patted her grandfather's cheek, and the world had kept turning. Don't embarrass us had always been the wrong instruction. The right instruction, the one no one had given me, the one I had had to work out myself, was something more like, show up fully. Take up space. Trust your own weight. I had done that. My father found me near the door when the last of it was wrapping up. He had Diane at his elbow and the ambassador and James a few steps behind, and he stopped in front of me with the formal bearing he wore for important things. "I want you to bring her on Sunday," he said. "For lunch. Just family." I looked at him. "No event," he said. "No occasion. Just come." "Just come," I repeated. "Yes." Lily chose this moment to wake up. She lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at my father, and, "This is the thing I will tell her when she is older. This is the detail I will carry." She held out her arms to him. Arms out, that universal baby gesture that means you, specifically I would like you. My father looked at me. "Can I?" he said. "Yes," I said. And I handed her over again, this time with something different in my chest. Not the performance calm of managed grief, not the careful reserve of someone protecting themselves from disappointment. Something simpler and more frightened, and more genuine than that. Something that might, given time and Sunday lunches and the patient, imperfect work of people who were trying, turn into something worth keeping. James's hand found mine briefly in the space between us. Not a claim, not a statement, just a contact, a small human fact. I held on. Outside, the garden was lit and the night was warm and my daughter was in her grandfather's arms and I was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where I had decided to be.